This video is going to show you how to create massing sub-elements like windows or grids to put onto the faces or the elevations of your masses. So here I'm looking at the south side of the building, and I know there's a building here. Actually, if I turn my context on, you can see. So I can actually have a decent amount of windows here. And if these are the offices, let's say I want to create a lot of interior daylight. So the way I would go about that is, let's turn the context off again. There's a couple ways. I can go into a dedicated front view, which looks directly at the south facade, or I could stay in a parallel view, or if you're in perspective, you can change your projection to a parallel mode. And I'm going to use something called set view look at surface. So it's orient camera to surface is the command, but I think it's probably faster to just find that orient look at surface button. And I'm going to click on a surface that I want to look at, and now it's going to have an arrow that I'm basically that's going to look at the camera. So if I click yes here, you can see that it creates essentially a front view. But I'm looking directly at the surface, and you can notice that the C-plane is different in the front view than it is in the parallel view. So what I'm going to do to draw on this surface, if you remember from the C-plane video, I'm going to set C-plane to surface or set C-plane to object. So I'm going to use the set C-plane to surface here, and you can use the C-plane command and do the surface option. Select the same surface I looked at and then just draw in its x-axis. And now you can see that I'm drawing directly on that surface. Actually, if I change this to a perspectival mode, you'll see that anything I draw in this view will be, associated with that plane, unless I snap to an element accidentally. So just be aware of that. So let's undo this here and start from this. So in the last video I showed you how to make floors in your massing diagrams using contour or intersect. I put these all on a layer here so I can actually turn that off, but it's nice to keep these on and on their own layer so that I know if, for instance, I want to put a window here, whether this is going to be spandrel glass or if I need to recess the wall, and how that will eventually, or recess the floor, sorry, and how that will eventually play into my organization of windows. So I have 12 feet here to use, but I have 2 feet of plenum space if I want to create a grid based on that in the horizontal axis based on 2 foot markings or 4 foot markings, for instance. So I'm just going to start drawing here. I'm actually going to use the rectangle command, and because I know the C-plane is here, I can actually just draw a rectangle, and the sort of counterpoint to that is to just draw 2 lines. Now, if I turn my floors off, the rectangle has those top overlapping lines, and the lines do not. So depending how you export this or how you diagram, you might actually want to overlap lines here, or you might not. I can draw a rectangle here that goes from floor to floor, or I can actually go from the base of the floor through the spandrel glass. And then I could do something like copy it up or copy it down. Let's select that, copy it. Nope, I just need copy, not copy to clipboard, and go down. Then you can start to see maybe I want to create something like that. And then if you turn your floors off, you would actually see that line there. So your elevation would actually look something like this. But that's something where you don't necessarily need to have that in the diagram, but in your Revit model you have to be aware that or the real life implication will be that you'll see the plenum through the window. But that can be made into an architectural feature. If you want to add a little bit of order in here, you can make a new sublayer called grids. And I usually turn my grid layers down to like a gray line, and I change their line type to like a dashed dot. Let's make sure we're on that layer, and I will draw a line here. I'm just going to draw and snap to something that I know will be in the correct plane. So if I go into perspective here, you can see that grid line I just drew overlaps, and then I usually scale it up so it's a little bit larger. Let's find it and do it again. Whoops. And so now I have this grid line here. I can use a command like array or array linear, and I can maybe, let's do 20 of these in this direction. I can guess, or I can do, I want them at 4 feet. But what might be nicer actually is if I use divide, which I think I showed in another tutorial. If I use that surface edge, and I can divide these given a length, or I can estimate how many I want. So let's say I want 12. And then the final length came out to be 7 foot 3 inches. So now I can actually array linear 13, because you have n+1 for arrays, and now I have a grid that I can base my windows off of. Let's go ahead and delete these windows here. And again, I would recommend using a rectangle. So we're going to do new layer and call it windows, and use rectangle so that we can sort of overlap that spindle glass, and if we or overlap the plenums, so that if we do want to turn off our floors for some of the diagrams, we can. So let's go ahead and just start creating some windows here. So when you're drawing on a surface and you have multiple overlapping lines, you might have to change the draw order, what's called the draw order of some of these lines, so you can see one over the other. For instance, I have these grids and I've actually completed all of the windows here, but it was very hard to see exactly through these lines where the windows are. I'm going to right click on the grids layer and I'm going to select objects. It's going to select all of the objects on that. I'm going to start typing a command called send to back. And now when I click away, you can see all of the windows that I've drawn, and these are actually sent to the back of the drawing order. You can also, if you don't want to send those to the back, you can right click your windows, select objects, and you can type bring to front. And now your grids sort of stay where they are and your windows come to the front. And if I turn my floors off, for example, this is the window pattern that I sort of created out of on my elevation. You can see in a parallel mode here, perspective mode, that was just one version. In the diagramming tutorial, which is going to follow this, I'm going to show you how to change the materiality of this just for diagrams so that we can bring it into Revit and we know what is what. Just show you a couple different methods, but the last part of this tutorial I want to show as an explanation of how you would take maybe a curved surface or a surface you can't look directly at and start to draw on that surface. So one of the methods is actually to use the line method, right? So I have the edges of my floor plates and I can just draw actually directly on the surface here if I know I'm snapping to the object. And that's actually probably the easiest way, and I would probably, if I know this is straight, I would draw those lines in, and now if I turn my floors off, you can see that that is just on the surface. And a note on these windows, you can see I brought their draw order up to the front. If you run a command called clear draw order, and we actually select all of these, you can see that they'll go away. So you can change the drawing order, which is whatever's being presented, most up front. So just keep that in mind. So how would I draw on something like this curved surface? Well, if I have the floors and I had intersected a plane, or I drew a point where I knew that I wanted to intersect, I could select this curve. Actually, I'll draw in where I want the window to be. Let's say I want it to be here. If I turn my floors off, you can see that there's no top curve there. But I can actually select these two curves and copy and paste them. And now they're on my floors layer, they're on my floors layer still, so I would want to move them to the windows layer. And now if I turn my floors layer off, you can see I have those two, and I would select these guys and trim out the curves that I don't want. So now I have a window that is curved. There's a bunch of alternative methods. What you can do is use, let's say, something like a box, any shape really, and you can actually move it up and over, and then you can run the intersect command. And I'm going to select these two objects to intersect, and now you can see that if I delete that, I have the window there. And obviously that didn't really line up with my floors layer, but I might, have it in the middle of my floors, for instance. I can also use a command called project. So let's change this to a parallel line mode. I'm going to go ahead and look at this surface here. So I'm going to set view, and I'm going to look at this surface. So now I'm directly looking at this surface right here, and I'm going to go ahead and set my C-plane to that surface as well, just so I know if I'm not, I'm not drawing directly on this surface. I'll delete these so it's a little bit less confusing, and make sure I am on the Windows layer. And I'll just draw where I want, say, a window. So if I move around, if I go to, say, a parallel view again, or perspectival view, you can say I didn't draw on that. But I can use a command called project. If I go into this view, I run the project command. Actually, let me select nothing and run the project command. It's going to ask me what curves and points that I want to project. So we'll select these guys. Now it's asking me what polysurface or surface I want to project to. I can select that polysurface behind it. And it's going to ask me for what direction I want. If I just put C-plane in the Z, and I know that my surface is normal to my drawing, then it will project onto the object. Now let me run that again in a non-parallel view. So I'm going to select these objects to project, and if I select this as my object to project to, it's going to tell me the projection missed, because that's the C-plane, the Z is actually going up, right? So if I project this way, it's never going to hit that object. So I'm going to run this again, select those curves that I want to project, select this what I want to project onto, but I'm going to change this to let's try a view. So the view is actually kind of nice. Let's just go this way, and now you can see that it projects literally depending on what view I was looking at it. And so these are lines on the surface. And actually, because this is a whole object, it actually projected that all the way through. So that might lead to some nice experiments. Let's undo that and let's run it one final time here. Let's run project. Select these items for projecting. This item to project to, and I'm going to set the direction to custom. Now I'm going to run it, and it's going to ask me for a direction. I can literally draw anywhere here. So I know I want it to be parallel to this line. And so it projects in that manner, and I can delete these sort of exterior versions. This is nice for some formal shape making too, because you can take these objects or these lines, and now you can trim out features, and you can draw boxes in here if that's what you want to do. And let's make it go this way. Let's go out to here, right? So you can sort of experiment with massing in that manner. But for right now, if you leave it untrimmed, you can see that this is where my windows would be. And in the diagramming tutorial, again, I'm going to show you how to change this material so that you know it's glass.